So welcome to Freedom Becomes You. I'm delighted today to have Trina Altman as my guest. Hi Trina, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Good. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I'm happy to be here with you.
It's so nice to see your face. So I am excited to talk to you about what you're doing right now. I know that you're working on a book. I know that you have these online courses that you're doing, and you, to me, are an example of someone who is really, you really have this pioneer spirit. And what I do on Freedom Becomes You is I seek out people for these interviews who I see as the integrators, the innovators, people who are bringing together different disciplines. And my primary interests are in the relationship between mind-body practice, psychology, and science. And I know that you have some very interesting stuff in these spheres that you're working with. So where do you want to start? What do you want to tell us about?
Gosh, I don't know. Give me a directed question.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. So I know that you've been teaching yoga and Pilates for the last 10 years or so. And I know that you have had an interesting path that was sort of initiated by a pain that you were in and a chronic injury that you had. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so after, let's see, I finished my 200-hour in 2008, and then probably 2009 was when I started doing more flow, taking more flow type classes, and as well as teaching them. And I think it was just accumulation of time and genetics. I'm hyper flexible. And even though I was always still going to the gym, I didn't know that I was hypermobile. I just thought I was naturally gifted at yoga. Because that's what everyone told me.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun to do stuff you're good at. The problem is with the body adapts. And so when you do too much of one type of thing, and that could be anything, it could be not moving, or it could be running, or in my situation, it was, I think, just a lot of up dog, down dog chaturangas without enough strength and stability in my shoulders, elbows, wrists. I mean, everywhere, but primarily that because my major injury was supraspinatus, frayed supraspinatus, so not torn, in my right shoulder.
Okay.
And yeah, the pathway to figuring that out took some time because no one really wants to go to the doctor. It's more fun, like getting massages and puncture and, chiropractic and hoping for the best.
Yes.
Once I found my way into physical therapy, I was very fortunate. My physical therapist is the kind of PT that spends the whole hour with you. I did go to one prior to him, who is more of what I call the factory PT model, where there's like 15 beds lined up and each patient gets about 10 minutes with the PT, and you kind of rotate to stations. So you go to like the heat station, the ice station, the e-stim station. Then the therapist does some hands-on work and talks to you a little bit. And then you go to the exercise station, which is, with a PT aide that might be like 16 or 17 years old and hopefully watches you do your exercise.
Yes, yes. Thank you for describing the model that I never want to experience.
Yeah. So actually that model didn't help me.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, I did go to PT and it didn't help. The model that helped was you're here in LA, Sean Hampton is over in Westwood, and he spends the full hour with you. It is not, so I think for a while it was covered, and then it was like out of network. The way insurance is here in the U.S., it's they try to pay as little as possible. But when I saw the value of what I was getting and the progress that I was making by, he would educate me because I wanted to be educated. So we would walk over to the skeleton and he would point on the skeleton and show me things and answer all my questions. in addition to like the regular protocol that he would take anyone else through that wasn't a total nerd and asking questions.
So you're educating yourself through the process of your physical therapy and really taking advantage of the fact that you're in a room with someone who knows a bunch of stuff that you don't know yet, right?
Yeah, I continued to go for way longer. I just paid him out of pocket. I would often show up with just a big stack of papers and books and a list of questions that I couldn't get answered from, say, continuing ed workshops or trainings in the yoga, fitness, Pilates space. Yeah, I was, I looked at it as like, I'm not going to get a master's degree, in exercise science, or I don't want to be a PT, but I'm still going to invest in my education. And so that means, an hour of this physical therapist time and me spending it out of pocket, that money is going to be better spent, perhaps getting my specific questions answered, not just about my own body, but my private clients' bodies. So I would ask them about the private clients that I was working with and refer them to him as well. So that was an education, because I still need to send people to him, and it helps me to be a better teacher for their sessions based on what they're doing.
Yeah. You introduced a concept a couple of minutes ago that I wanted to loop back around to, because I think it's something that a lot of people may not have heard of before, and I think you're an example of someone who is quote unquote naturally flexible, right? Who is then going to have the experience of going to yoga classes and feeling like I can do this and this is fun and I get a lot of praise for it. And very often that's the kind of person who becomes a yoga teacher, because you look good in photos doing yoga and you can do impressive looking things and you can demonstrate things in front of a room that people ooh and ah and go, wow, this is so amazing. You have a really strong practice. Wow, you must have worked really hard and yeah hello, we can get into that in a moment, and there's very often this kind of idealization that if you are able to do very bendy looking poses, those are more advanced, therefore you must have worked really hard. You must maybe be more enlightened in some kind of mythic way where, the range of motion you have is indicative of your spiritual virtue somehow. And all, I'm being playful in terms of how I'm describing this, but this is I think a very common thing in the yoga world that we're only really learning about now, and people are only really starting to talk openly about now. I think in our generation, people who've been teaching 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, who fit this model that I'm describing in terms of maybe a genetic temperament, and finding that at a certain point, that overemphasis on extreme flexibility and doing the same things again and again and again turns out to actually not be so great for you. Where I think certainly the way I thought about it when I started out in my 20s was that yoga is this kind of perfect system that's complete. And if you just do it with a lot of discipline and diligence consistently over time, you're going to get more and more flexible. You're going to be able to do more and more impressive looking things. It's going to have all of these kind of psychospiritual benefits as a result that are somehow tied to this physical activity that you're doing. And if you have any injuries, it's probably just that you weren't using proper alignment, or you weren't thinking the right thoughts, like whatever the different ways are that this is framed. And so I know I'm setting this up in a really big way, but I think it's a very important topic. And so when you said I am hypermobile, tell us more about that. Like how did you find out that you were hypermobile? Who did you learn this from, and what does that actually mean technically?
Yeah, I would say that there's a little bit of an echo. I don't know if okay, I think it's gone.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I went to physical therapy and I was like, what's my diagnosis? Because that's kind of what you're there for. And he said, well, you have multidirectional instability in both of your shoulders. And the sort of slang term for that is you have a pitcher's shoulder, like a baseball pitcher. So I had a shoulder that would be typical of what he would see. He works with a lot of, sports
Uh-huh.
degrees. A baseball player who's
Yeah.
been
Winding up.
and
Uh-huh.
but yet I've never played baseball.
Okay.
So that was, that was kind of my first inkling of, oh, this isn't a good thing, as opposed to, what I wish I would have known and heard instead of practice and all is coming. If you're hyper flexible, practice and all is coming. Yeah, actually, there's a lot of injuries that will be coming.
Oh no! Oh no!
Yes, all is coming. Yes.
Yes.
And the way the model is set up from a capitalist standpoint, if you are the owner of a studio, you need people to come every day and take classes and buy packages. And so I remember it was really popular in the 90s. I started with Bikram when I lived in New York City. And I was in my sort of mid to late 20s, and they would have these challenges with a little chart on the wall. And, just like in school, and there were little star stickers and your name. And it was, I can't remember, it was a 30-day challenge or 90-day challenge. But, every time you came into class each day, you would put your sticker, and it was like, who has the most stickers, who's come the most times. Because it was, good for the bottom line, for making money. It kept you from going and doing other types of exercise or movement. And of course, initially you're going to feel better because anything, any new like stimulus, if you've been like I was, kind of depressed in my 20s on the couch, trying to, figure out my existential career crisis, I felt a lot better, after sweating and moving. But the part that's not discussed is the sort of decreasing return on those, on that investment over time with, doing too much of the same thing.
So tell me, you said multi-directional instability.
Yeah.
Okay. So what does that mean? What is multi-directional instability?
So, the sort of tissues in your joint, whether it's the ligaments, the tendons, the cartilage, the labrum, just, aren't, there's not a sense of normal stiffness or tension that, what is normal, but that along the spectrum, and there's a spectrum. So I don't have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which would be another end of the spectrum, and there's another Marfan syndrome.
So if we're talking about the continuum of how much people's joints moved, right? Just to simplify it, on one end of the spectrum are these syndromes that you were just describing, where people they basically their bodies are not holding themselves together, right? Their joints are just completely floppy.
Like contortionists, if you've ever watched, or the performers that do the body popping, where they can kind of pop their joints in and out, and for show, like as a performance kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's a genetic thing. Yeah.
So that would be one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum would I guess be maybe your kind of stereotypical inflexible guy who has very little range, or like your bodybuilder who's gotten themselves into the place where they can't tie their own shoelaces or brush their own teeth because everything has become so bound up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Robert Schleif I love the way he described it. He said, do you have, obviously it's not this black and white, but there's some people that have more of what he calls like Viking fascia, and others who have more Indian princess fascia. So depending on where you live in the world and your genetics and your background.
Yeah, so these are genetic typologies. The way I had it explained to me once, which is probably, again, an oversimplification and not entirely accurate, is that the ratio of fascia to dense muscle fiber is maybe slightly different in terms of how your tissue is constituted.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even people who have more slow twitch muscle fibers versus fast twitch.
Yeah.
self-select. I mean, there's a reason why I didn't get obsessed with sprinting and I like yoga.
Absolutely.
I'm not good at moving fast.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I saw some fascinating research once about how in all of the sprint events in the Olympics going back, years and years and years, that all of the gold medal winners could trace their genetics not only to a particular country in Africa, but to a particular region within that country where genetically there just was this tendency to have a much denser concentration of fast twitch muscle fibers.
Yeah.
And that just was just mind-blowing.
Yeah. And so, if you're training for sport, let's say you want to be a really good golfer, you don't want to have equal rotation on both sides because that's going to mess up your golf game.
Mm-hmm.
But for the demographic that most of us are working with as teachers, it's just somebody who wants to feel better and not be in pain, which means usually that you need to do some of the stuff you don't like and you're not good at, balance yourself out.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not typically the marketing message, the educational message, unfortunately, but it's changing.
It's changing. And I believe it's changing, and I hope it's going to continue to change. And I see people like you, and there's a small group of folks who I think are very courageously seeking to be part of that change. And it's an interesting thing because I feel like there's something unique about yoga and the mystique around yoga and the sense of it as this set of spiritual exercises that are ancient, that come from a faraway place, that are imbued with some kind of magic, right? Where I think for the last 40 years or so in the US, it's almost been taboo to be critical or to apply a scientific lens or to suggest that anything about the yoga sequences that have been handed down could continue evolving and could use, could benefit from information from research and from other movement modalities and other fields of inquiry. And I don't think that's the case as much in other movement forms and ways of thinking about the body and exercise. And so I think it's really good that we're breaking that taboo. And I think it's good that we're recognizing that the way we practice asana, just like everything else, needs to continue evolving to meet our needs and to reflect what we know now, what we're learning now, and also what we're learning now about what we don't know about the body and about movement and about injuries and all of this kind of stuff. So I'd love to hear more from you about, how you are sort of seeking to be part of that change, if that feels like a worthwhile question.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is so I teach group classes, privates, workshops, and then I teach a number of different, like say, weekends of workshops or 3-day immersions, longer trainings. And so I have all these different venues in which I can share things that I'm learning and changing in what I'm doing. And also I always say, look, just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. That's why I'm not a clinician, but I have great physical therapists that I can refer you to. But I think, it just kind of happens. It dribbles out little by little. The wonderful thing that I think has been the instigator of this becoming bigger has been social media. Okay. Because for quite a long time, the only folks I was interacting with were in person, that I met at a continuing education thing that I was teaching or taking, or that I saw, in my regular private client practice or classes. But now what's happening is there's these two parallel worlds of the the people that are sharing this information in person, and
Mm-hmm.
then the people that are sharing this information like throughout the day, multiple times a day on social media.
Okay.
And then what's been so exciting is through the folks that I've met and interacted with on social media, we've made it an effort because we've connected in such a wonderful way online to meet each other in person.
Uh-huh.
And so then you start to realize you're not as alone as you think you are.
Yeah.
The teacher that I have a friend of mine who started off in fitness as a teacher and then got injured and went to Pilates. And now she's back to teaching fitness and Pilates because she, rehabbed herself. And but that we have such a similar trajectory, even though her two realms and her, were fitness Pilates and mine was yoga Pilates.
Mm-hmm.
But we met online because the things that she was writing blogs about and doing videos about were very much, the same context and the same through line as what I was talking about. And so, I think it used to be you could only share this kind of information if you had, $100,000 to hire somebody to film a DVD of yourself, or if you had 30 grand to pay a publicist to get you on Dr. Oz with your workout routine, or had some sort of special connection to like the New York Times, fitness editor, the LA Times. And then, so there were just a few people that were sharing things. And now everybody can share. And it's a lot easier to find people that, are sharing things that you're interested in learning. So it's both ends of the spectrum. You can share with more people, but you can also learn from more people. You can now learn online from people that you would used to have to, fly there, get a hotel, and pay for the continuing education.
Yeah. Yeah, so it really is the information age. I mean, and it creates this diversity where whatever your little niche is, if there's only 10 people in your town who are talking about a particular topic, and you're the one who has this niche interest with regard to that topic, that's very lonely. But when you reach out online, 10% of thousands of people is actually a pretty significant group. And you can geek out with each other and learn and experiment and support. I think that's really beautiful.
It's democratized things because, just as with yoga, so there's Krishnamacharya and then Patabi Joyce, Deskachar, and BKS Iyengar. So there are these four men that were, really sort of the disseminators of the information that was deemed worthy of learning. If you were a yoga teacher or practitioner. And Pilates, there was just one man, Joseph. And so the stakeholders were the folks that could say, I was lucky. I lived in New York City when Joseph was alive and studied with him. And this is the exact order of the exercises that he taught, whether true or not true. But there wasn't any information shared. I mean, like the first teacher trainings, there weren't even pictures in the manuals. Right? It were just like words. And then there were finally pictures. And now it's like a manual. What? Like our manual's on, it's online with videos. And so this, this something that was so hard to come by. I remember it was a dream of mine to even take a Pilates class because there just was not offered where I live. And I wasn't going to move to New York to learn it like many people my age did.
Yes. Wow. So it's incredible how rapidly that's changed, because you're talking about something for yourself that was maybe like 20, 30 years ago. And now it's different for people who are coming up, which is so cool. So I want to just come back around to some of the stuff that we've started to get into, because we only have a little more time here. So multidirectional instability, and your teaching and what you're starting to teach now. or what you're sort of sharing with the world now that I know has been developing for a long time. Um, and I wanted to come back around to the little humorous moment you had where I was saying, oh, if you're naturally very flexible, then people go, oh wow, she has such a strong practice, and you put the air quotes around it. So just to get a little more specific, because some of what we're talking about could sound abstract to someone who's not already in this type of conversation. Um, Link these things for me, right? The repetitive nature of doing only one thing, and how your tissues adapt to that. What might be problematic about that if you're not integrating other things? How this relates to multidirectional instability, especially in your case, and then what it means to maybe have a strong practice to you now in terms of what you're putting out in the world.
Right. Yeah. So I think, when I went to college, I studied political science, and but then just the way I was always raised to never believe anything,
Mm-hmm.
always ask why, and question everything.
Uh-huh.
And so when I went into this career of yoga and Pilates, um, and I noticed that other people didn't have the same upbringing that I did, and didn't have that experience of, oh, okay, you're going to write a paper, you decide what your thesis is and your argument. It doesn't mean that you're right.
Mm-hmm.
You just pick one thing and argue it.
Yep.
You back it up with research, knowing that there's research to prove the opposite argument.
Uh-huh.
And so when it comes to the body, and because asana involves the body, I think, what happens when I have traveled around teaching teachers is that they don't have that critical thinking awareness, or just, it's them. And so they'll say, well, is this pose good or bad? Or is this alignment good or bad? Or how would I modify this for somebody who has a sore knee?
Mm-hmm.
And what I said, well, it's very simple. Like, it always depends.
Mm.
As movement educators, we aren't diagnosing. We're not prescribing. We're simply introducing, a stimulus. So, if I have a client who says, when we're doing, this kneeling pose, Parigasana, it bothers my knee.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a private session, so there's a conversation. Okay, well, what if we put a pad underneath your knee? How does it feel now? Feels great. Okay, great. Let's stick with that. Or I put the pad underneath your, nope, still doesn't work. Okay, let's create this exact same shape, but lying down on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Or let's do some corrective exercises that are going to strengthen your knee that don't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Someday you will be able to go back to. So problem-solving skills, as opposed to expecting the answer to come from above and that there is an answer.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, so I'm really hearing it's not only critical thinking, it's kind of this scientific method in action where you're experimenting and you're finding out. I don't know. I don't already have the answer from some authoritative source that I just believe. And if it doesn't work for you, well then, either I don't know what to do next, or there must be something innately wrong with you that this perfect thing is not working for you. Instead, I'm hearing this trajectory of being present with what's happening, forming a hypothesis, trying the experiment, seeing what data you get, and then adjusting, based on that, which I think is liberating.
Yeah, I created this short course. It's like a 35-minute course, and it's called Regress to Progress. And basically, I just lay it out like, okay, these are all the things that you could do to regress a movement or a pose. These are all the things you could do to progress a movement or a pose. So if somebody comes to you and says, it hurts my, wrists when I'm doing downward facing dog. You look through the list and you're like, oh, well, should we shorten a lever, or should we change the orientation to gravity, or it's closed chain? Maybe we should do an open chain variation of this, or, so it's basically just like a list of options that you can cycle through in your head and try, because to be different from day to day, as opposed to saying, well, you have carpal tunnel syndrome, so you should never do down dog.
Uh-huh.
Or
Uh-huh.
you have carpal tunnel, but like if you just do down dog enough, it'll go away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's like some answers that can be found in other ways.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so in terms of yoga and the way I think both you and I, practiced and taught yoga perhaps a long time ago, there's something about only doing specific sequences of movements, right? And only holding specific postures that you were talking about in terms of an adaptive response. So what is that? Say more about what you mean about that adaptive response.
Yeah. So basically, well, there are no good movements or bad movements.
Mm-hmm.
There are no good poses or bad poses. There's only movements that you're you're not adapted and ready for,
Mm-hmm.
or you're doing too much of.
Okay.
And so it's kind of this Goldilocks thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happens is, we get better at whatever we do
Mm-hmm.
over again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we also have bodies that wear out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah,
you,
so it's not an endless ascent towards being more strong and more flexible and able to move better indefinitely, right?
Yeah, so just like with cardiovascular exercise, I mean, a great example is I been taking this jumping trampoline class. I absolutely love it. When I first started taking it, I was dying. It was really hard for me to take the whole class. I wasn't used to doing jumping for 45 minutes. Now when I take the class, I'm not really that tired. I'm not that, so I've adapted to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two choices. I could decide, which I'm not because I'm just kind of lazy, to like progress it more. And who knows, maybe now I start jumping for 2 hours, or I do it, 4 times a week instead of 2 times a
Yep.
week. There's it's called periodization, and that's not even my forte, but it's the same with the yoga poses. So if it's now easy for you, you might need to do something different to balance out what you're doing that's easy and mindless. You don't have to adapt those motor
Second nature, yeah.
Because as we get older, we need different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, great. You've adapted to your yoga practice. You're really proficient at it. But like, what's the situation with, are you ever giving your heart exercise?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or, what kind of external loads are you providing to your body so that you don't fall and fracture your hip, even though you can perform a perfect tree pose or, a gorgeous, warrior two and hold it for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm hearing a couple things in there that maybe have been lacking in yoga asana as it's been taught for the last, whatever it is, 40, 50 years in the US, which is cardiovascular exercise and strength training, and the kind of strength training that is a beautiful complement to stretching, right? To increasing range of motion, and especially for people who perhaps tend more in the direction of being unstable in their joints. I think a lot of the long-term repetitive use injuries that happen in yoga, and honestly, I think part of what's happening right now is people who are our age, people who are in their 40s, who've maybe been teaching for a long time and practicing for a long time, and older than us, are breaking the silence and actually telling the truth about something that's been going on all along, but it was a secret, which is that we get injured and we start dealing with pain and we start not being able to only do the type of yoga practice that we did when we were younger that always made us feel good, because that's not how the body is.
Right.
Your body adapts over time, and you actually perpetuate your imbalances by only doing the thing that you always do and the thing that you enjoy doing and the thing that's easy for you. And that very often what we find is that we're not actually strong. in certain ways. And we can do certain things very well and appear strong, but we're not strong in other ways. And very often we are kind of chronically unstable, and we've been perpetuating and exacerbating that instability through, trying to get our legs behind our heads, or being able to do splits, or being able to do very impressive looking back bends.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we end up finding, oh, it's the physical therapy, it's the Pilates, it's the strength training, that actually is the good medicine that then enables us to come back to the yoga practice in a new way, in a more integrated way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not having it be a secret. I mean, I understand if you own a lucrative yoga studio and every class is hot power vinyasa, and you not only own the studio, but you teach the classes. But, say you started the studio when you're in your mid-20s and now you're 40 and you just had back surgery, but you don't tell anybody, and you're still teaching those same classes to 20-somethings, or maybe there are 40-somethings in your class. It's, everything has to evolve. And, as somebody who worked in fashion, I often say fitness is just like fashion, but yoga maybe should be a little more like fitness, because in the world of fitness, when everyone got hurt doing Jane Fonda aerobics, because jumping up and down on a hard floor wasn't cutting it after a while, they switched to low impact.
Yep.
And step aerobics. So, there's nothing wrong with hot power flow yoga, but at the same time, not keeping it a secret that just like the high impact aerobics or whatever it is.
We're doing these long-term experiments together en masse, and there actually is data that comes back to us, right?
Right.
So let's keep adapting based on that. Well, I just want to say you really inspire me, and I personally I'm fascinated, as I know you are, with human movement and with all of the different iterations. And for me, one way of saying this is it's all yoga, right? Like my definition of yoga is human beings exploring mind, body, awareness, and expression. And so I'm really passionate in my own practice and my own teaching these days with figuring out where those overlaps are and how things intersect, and how to keep making what I'm doing with my body and what I'm inviting others to do with their bodies, how to keep it intelligent and fresh and informed by what we're learning today. And I think any rigid adherence to form and to like ideology, it's always problematic. It has to be an openness and a creativity and a fluidity and a willingness to be influenced by new information.
Yes, absolutely. That's what I've always appreciated about you, Julian. So the feeling is mutual. It's always been comforting to have found somebody like you in the yoga world that, was more open to the idea of, things can change. And that's okay.
And getting to connect with you on these topics and some of the other people that we have in common only makes me, hungry for whatever the next horizons are going to be with that regard. Tell us before we wrap up, where can people find out more about you? What are the offerings that you have available online? Any of that?
The easiest place to find all of it is on my website, which is trinaaltman.com. And I have different headings. So there's an online heading. So if you're not in LA, I've got a yoga deconstructed course. I have the regress to progress course. I have Pilates deconstructed courses. And then I have online classes through Jenny Rawlings' library, and I'm going to film some for Yoga Anytime. And then I travel. So if you want to study with me in person, workshops or weekends of workshops, I list all of those on my website as well. So
excellent.
All over. Yeah.
Lots of cool stuff. And I don't know if you want to say anything about it, but I know you're working on this book, and you potentially have a publisher lined up.
Yeah, I've got the contract right over there. I need to sign it and mail it.
Excellent. And the book is going to be called?
Yoga Deconstructed.
All right. I'm looking forward to reading it. Thank you so much, Trina. This was really fun.
And thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.